15th, 1949 at 12 noon. People crowded the streets in front of TV store windows. At noon, the screen lighted up. This is WBTV, Charlotte, North Carolina, signing on Channel 3 television from Charlotte, North Carolina, the Queen City of the South. And WBTV was on the air.
I'm Jim Patterson, and the day that I read that first sign-on was absolutely wild.
Soon, a staff of reporters and film photographers were jumping in their news wagons, lights flashing, speeding off to cover plane crashes.
First with television in the Carolinas. First with color television in the Southeast. First with color videotape in the nation.
When one thinks of pioneering in TV, he thinks of WBTV.
This is a WBTV special presentation. On this day, 70 years ago, Charlotte's WBTV became the first broadcast television station in the Carolinas to go on the air. We carry on that legacy tonight as we celebrate the moments we've shared as a community and a nation. Join us for the next hour as we reflect on 7 decades of serving this region. And we invite you behind the scenes for a glimpse of what's in store for the future. WBTV has spent every day for the last 70 years working to earn your trust. We're proud to be on your side.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this special night. I'm John Carter. You know, I first started here at WBTV right after I graduated from Appalachian State University. So, like you, I've seen a lot of changes over the years, but one constant throughout all those years has been you, the viewer, welcoming our team into your home. You've tuned to us in the good times and the bad times, and you've trusted us to bring you the most important stories impacting you and our area with the facts. And throughout the next hour, my friends and coworkers here at WBTV are going to be joining me as we look back at some of the biggest stories we've covered, those that made us stronger or perhaps brought us together, and those that we still talk about today. When you think about it, I'm not sure anyone could have imagined back on July 15, 1949, what was to come. After all, the very moment we are celebrating tonight almost didn't happen. If you don't know the story, there's no one better to tell it than the very man who signed WBTV on the air back in 1949, Jim Patterson.
Well, I don't think anybody on the staff thought we'd really get on the air, that all of this would manage to work. You see, I had to be at the transmitter at Spencer Mountain at 12 noon for the sign-on. And everything was up in the air at the Wilder Building Studios, of course. And naturally, I got a late start. And practically had to fly those 26 miles to get there on time, roaring out Wilkinson Boulevard at 85 miles an hour all the way. But we did just make it.
And we made it all right, but it was still quite a gamble. At the time, a television set cost a month's salary, and unlike today, the station didn't own a single camera that first day we signed on. Still, excitement surrounded the idea of TV and what it could mean. Now, we have spent weeks digging through the archives here at WBTV, and we found books like this where every story was written down with the tape number and the date it aired. And we also found this ad from the Charlotte Observer announcing our big day and the start of regular scheduled television broadcasts. But there wasn't much to that schedule. The first day, this image, take a look, it's called a multiscope, alternated with a test pattern for hours. The Cliff Edwards Show followed, then Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not, the 54th Street Review, and the movie A Star Is Born. But who was watching that day? Certainly wasn't like it is today. You may be watching right now from a smartphone or a tablet. Back then you had to be in front of a television to see us, and there were only about 1,000 sets in the area. By August, though, there were 2,000, and that number climbed to 8,500 by the end of 1949. And from there, television sales only continued to grow, as did we, as did our programming lineup.
Howdy doody doty doody ho ho ho.
Arthur Smith and the Cracker Jacks, Cowboy Fred Kirby, Betty Feezer.
Hello. On this very cold and getting much colder Wednesday visit, Let's talk about whether you should wash your face or whether you should cream your face.
The 1950s brought another first for WBTV viewers.
We've had a little rain, but it stopped the minute we got on the air.
They were able to put the names and voices they'd heard on radio with faces on television.
Doug Mays became as familiar as the next-door neighbor through the SO Reporter.
Programming mixed between news.
Now here's our own weather globetrotter, Claude McLean.
And entertainment.
Show us your best quarters.
Well, I feel my house offers but what you see.
All of it was produced in the same studio. As soon as news and weather finished, set change started.
From this studio space, such programs as Tap the Barrel, Shop by Television, Carolina Cookery, Nocturne, Synopsis, Money to Burn, and countless others were born.
At the time, live shows were king, and for good reason.
There was more time to fill. The networks provided fewer programs than today,
leaving imaginations to seemingly run wild for years to come.
There were quiz shows, comedies, musicals, interviews, kids shows, audience participation shows, how to do it shows. There was nothing we didn't try. We had no pressure from the rating system, very little fear of failure, and a lot of guts.
Kind of balances out the situation here.
And what's Burt Reynolds got that I haven't? Don't answer that.
Well, that would take an hour to explain, CJ, at least.
Join us each morning at 6 here on Channel 3.
News, weather, and sports each morning.
And you can get beauty tips, too.
In 1999, WBTV This Morning expanded to 5 a.m. Since then, we've added WBTV News Prime Time, first at 4, Morning Break.
We got red carpet for you. Yeah, everybody. We'll be right back with more Morning Break right after this.
And On Your Side Tonight with Jamie Bull.
Diagnose and treat things like, yes, prostate cancer. It's the second leading cause of cancer deaths in men.
As you can see, the mix of programming hasn't changed much. We still deliver news.
The Pentagon says it is sending about 1,000 additional troops to the Middle East.
And even have a little fun.
Only Cam Newton could pull that off,
exactly.
Right?
Okay, yes.
Only Cam Newton, or possibly me.
Oh, look at you.
But instead of one studio, there are 3. Each is named for a WBTV pioneer. Each carries a part of our legacy. Each reminds us how and where this all started.
This is WBTV, Charlotte, North Carolina, signing on Channel 3 television from Charlotte, North Carolina.
So much has changed since that day 70 years ago today. Now today we produce 47 hours of programming weekly from this building. Quite a difference when you compare that to where we started originally. And just as our founders realized excitement about television in 1949, they would soon realize there was a hunger for news. Stories like a massive freight station fire, a brave teenage girl standing in the face of adversity, a presidential visit, and even an elephant on the run in Charlotte. It all happened in the first 10 years we were on the air. And we're going to look back at those stories and more as we celebrate 70 years of being on your side.
Hey WBTV, happy 70th. Because of you and your over $5 million raised, no family will ever receive a bill from St. Jude. Not for treatment, travel, housing, or food. And because of that, we say, woo!
Before this skyline touched the sky, WBTV became the first TV broadcaster in the Carolinas. Before hashtags made headlines, before Hugo, before some hard-fought battles, WBTV became your most trusted local news by making sure that before we're on your screen, we're on your side. It's a different world now, but nothing's changed. We've spent every day for the last 70 years focused on earning your trust, and that's exactly how we'll spend tomorrow.
Our first decade saw the birth of Independence Boulevard in 1949, followed by the opening of both Ovens Auditorium and the Charlotte Coliseum in 1955. A year later, neighbors in McAdenville started what is now known as Christmastown, USA. I-85 opened in Mecklenburg County, followed by the Charlotte Motor Speedway in 1959. And I am joined now by my co-anchor, Christine Spiro. And, you know, we've been anchoring the morning show now for...
double digits now. 10 years.
Is it really 10 years?
Yes.
Oh, that's right. I started when I was 5 years old. So,
yeah, you wish.
I remember that well. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, it's been 10 great years.
10 great years. It really has been.
It's been a lot of fun.
And in fact, WBTV's anchor teams have all been together longer than any anchor teams at any other stations in Charlotte, at least 10 years.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the biggest questions we get, John, you and I, is, do we match on purpose each and every day? We somehow happen to wear the same color each and every day.
It's just like we've got this chemistry going here.
Right. It just naturally happens on a day-to-day basis, right?
Well, I guess that's what happens when you work together.
That's
with someone
right.
For so long. Yeah. Oh, well. We'll let you figure that one out. How about it? Hey, one of the most popular WBTV anchors of all time, Doug Mays, once said, "We learned this business and grew together as we went."
Yeah, in our first 10 years, we learned to cover news and cover it fast.
WBTV newsmen only were fast enough to photograph the site. We learned by doing.
Our first 10 years were busy.
Your SO reporter.
Starting with 1950.
With the pushing of this button, direct television is brought to Charlotte and the Carolinas.
A capacity crowd of over 56,000 people saw these two great teams meet at South Bend, Indiana.
There were big moments.
In June 1954, Charlotte's Southern Railway freight station burned, and WBTV provided live on-the-scene coverage from our own rooftop.
It is with compassion for our native land and love for our daughter, Dorothy, that we withdraw her as a student at Harding High School.
Big events.
Carolinians will long remember the telecast of President Eisenhower's speech on the 179th anniversary of the signing of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which originated from Freedom Park in Charlotte.
We set up a remote broadcast from Freedom Park, and it was a very big undertaking for us. And we televised that same year. We televised a state Republican convention.
Reporters vied for the top story.
Nelson would come in sometimes and say, "Norm, I have the greatest city council story you've ever seen."
And stories we talked about decades later, like an elephant escape.
And for 10 days, the Mecklenburg County Police, law enforcement officers from across the state, we even hired, I say we, the city hired a white hunter from Africa, who at that time was working in Sarasota for Ringling Brothers, to come up here and try to find Vicky.
That's something.
They did eventually find Vicky, and she was sent to live on a farm in Hickory.
Yeah, and when she passed away, her funeral was a television event that was carried right here on WBTV.
My.
All right, well, with our first 10 years behind us, we are only just getting started.
Yeah, in fact, we were about to go where no other news crew with a camera had gone before. That's ahead as we celebrate 70 years of being on your side.
Happy 70th, WBTV!
To our friends at WBTV, thank you for supporting Komen Charlotte's Race for the Cure for 20 years. We look forward to many, many more. Thank you. We love you.
Our second decade brought the first running of what is now called the Coca-Cola 600. Back then, it was the World 600. UNC Charlotte moved into its current location in 1961. A year later, Lake Norman became the state's largest man-made lake. 1966 was rocking when Elvis Presley came to town for the first time, and Mayor Belk gave us quite the nod by declaring July 15, 1969, WBTV Day.
Preparing knives, ooh, you can really fly getting those carrots peeled. And then the carrots have to be cut, of course, when they're put into the beef stew in the pot. Somebody always wants to take one or two.
No one can forget the legendary Betty Feeser. Her show aired every day at 1 o'clock, and it was one of the most popular shows in local broadcast. Thank you for celebrating with us tonight. I'm Kristen Miranda.
And I'm Coach Lamont. We met Betty Feeser's children back in 2016, right after Morning Break launched. They brought us a gift. Check this out. They gave us this picture. As you can see, it still hangs in the kitchen today. And what's cool about this picture?
Yeah.
It's the very spot where her kitchen set once stood.
Yeah, it was certainly a different time in television when Betty's show was on the air. Also different, though, the commercials that we aired.
Here are some of the most memorable spots we pulled from our archives.
The best place to buy it is your red and white. For quality and savings, that's the place to go. You really ought to try it, your friendly red and white. And now they bring you the Arthur Smith Show.
Yes, indeed, it's the Arthur Smith Show with all the Cracker Jacks, brought to you by the friendly red and white food stores.
Today, Betty Fieser celebrates her 20th anniversary in broadcasting with one of the area's top-rated daytime programs, The Betty Fieser Show. And her sponsors would like to relinquish their regular advertising time to salute her for 20 years of on-the-air work. Congratulations from Kate's Pickles. If they're Kate's, they're bound to be good. Holly Farms, for chicken that's always fresh. Harris Teeter, your friendly hometown store.
From Public Service Gas, serving Metrolina. Belk, your happy shopping store. And Hunter Dairies for the all Jersey milk. Happy 20th, Betty Fieser.
When I serve my family a special meal, I love to serve them all their favorites. So for my Sarah, there are tangy salads and hot corn on the cob. For Jim's meat and potatoes appetite, there's hot melt-in-your-mouth fried chicken and seasoned taters. For Michael, who likes a little of everything and lots of desserts, an assortment of good things to top off his meal. And for me, well, I'm just glad there's Holly Farms.
Right now, something's cooking specially for you at your Holly Farms Fried Chicken restaurant at the sign of good things to eat.
All of the JFG coffee bags, which is the best part of the meal to get your day started, are vacuum packed in a firm and fresh bag that seals in the just right flavor. And you know, folks in the Southeast have been using JFG coffee since the turn of the century, and it's blended and roasted from the world's finest coffee beans with a tradition of quality. It also comes in the 1-pound blue bag, 13-ounce bonus bag, and also the Sabro decaffeinated. But here we go. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, I think I'm going to get away.
See, now, feel how steady the bag is. Feel the bag.
Hard as a rock.
Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
I wish commercials were still that way.
Seriously, and the old Belk ad,
I know.
love that.
It's very cool. You know, when it came to news gathering, our second decade really didn't slow down much.
Yeah, sadly, we lost a president and a civil rights icon during those 10 years.
Yeah, and our cameras went somewhere they had never gone before, to an operating room and to war. Charlotte's Brooklyn neighborhood was forever changed after City Council approved an urban development plan. 1960 brought another first for WBTV as the first television station to take a camera into an operating room.
A team of 4 surgeons is about to open a 4-and-a-half-year-old child's chest.
Later that year, the world's longest stock car race was born at Charlotte Motor Speedway.
The weather is perfect. The turnout is tremendous. Major League stock car racing has come to North Carolina to stay.
In 1963, Walter Cronkite delivered news that shook the nation.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
America watched as the civil rights movement played out in front of television cameras.
Our ultimate aim is to bring about a change.
Here in Charlotte, we covered the 1965 bombing of Kelly Alexander's home. It was deemed an act of domestic terrorism. The case was never solved.
They would not seriously investigate and try to identify who did it.
TV cameras also took us to the front lines of the Vietnam War, also called the Television War.
We closed out the 60s by putting a man on the moon, and then Charlotte roared into the 70s.
Yeah, do you remember the Supreme Court case that put our city in the spotlight? Or perhaps the WBTV milestone at Charlotte Motor Speedway? Those stories and more are next as we celebrate 70 years.
Happy birthday, WBTV. Love, Betty Lynn. Or as you know me, Thelma Lou from The Andy Griffith Show.
Our third decade ushered in more entertainment and retail. South Park Mall opened in 1970, Carowinds ran its first ride in 1973, and Eastland Mall opened in 1975, and I-77 connected the region from Lake Norman to Fort Mill in 1976.
E&G. This is a sneak peek of what happens every day inside E&G. It's where all the live shots from our field crews are dialed in to transmit over the air.
And when it comes to going live on location, we've been thinking outside the box for years, even back in 1978.
Here's a look back at some of the biggest stories from our third decade on the air. July 20th, 1969, America landed on the moon and families watched from home.
That's one small step for man.
In 1971, the nation's eyes turned to Charlotte after the Supreme Court ruling in Swan versus CMS brought court-ordered busing to the district. 3 years later, tragedy struck when Eastern Airlines Flight 212 crashed in Charlotte.
The extent of damage is massive, and quite a few dead people. Bodies were strewn all over the woods.
72 people on board died. 10 people were burned but survived. In 1978, after an early morning wake-up call,
WBTV's 20-man crew began the day at 7:30 in the morning. Long before race time, they were arriving at the track.
WBTV became the first station in the United States to mount a live camera in a stock car. That camera was in Buddy Baker's car for the running of the World 600. In 1979, Charlotte found itself back in the national spotlight again, this time for a bad reason.
This was a stunning crime. Charlotte had never seen anything quite like this.
5 outlaw motorcycle gang members found murdered in a clubhouse. The crime became known as the 4th of July Massacre.
It would take 4 decades to crack that case, but in 2015, police finally closed it after they say members of the motorcycle community finally agreed to talk.
John Carter mentioned earlier that we've been digging through our archives for weeks getting ready for this special day, but it's not just stories or videos that we found.
John decided to take a field trip to the WBTV garage area to see what kind of artifacts he could dig up there.
I'm told the WBTV stuff is in this room back here. Okay, lights on? Yeah. There's some WBTV memorabilia back here. Let's see. First thing I see, though, is something that I used when I first started here. A typewriter. You remember what these are? No electricity, just type. It doesn't look like it's in the best shape anymore either. I mean, this used to be on the desk of every report. These are cameras from over the different years. This looks more like a studio camera to me right here. Is this a photographer's? Oh, now here's a camera they used to carry. Battery pack's missing here. Then an even bigger camera here. Look at all this. Is this a beta camera? I think so. And let's see. Oh, good gosh. It weighs a ton. Yeah, photographers used to have to carry this around and use it.
Pretty incredible finds there in the WBTV garage, but that's only part of what John found. If you want to see the rest, go right now to WBTV.com/since1949.
When WBTV signed on the air in 1949, our transmitter was in Gaston County. Imagine the surprise when letters from people as far as Minnesota and Colorado arrived saying they watched WBTV.
I mean, how was that even possible? And when did it happen? We'll explain when our celebration of 70 years continues.
Hi, Bob Inman. Happy birthday to my home of 25 years.
In our 4th decade, the airport went international with a new name. President Jimmy Carter brought Habitat to Humanity here in 1987. 1988 was a big year with the arrival of the NBA, and construction began on I-485.
And it only took 30 years to finish 485.
Right.
I'm not sure a story got covered more in this area than 485. But that's not the number we're talking about tonight. We're talking about 70. 70 years, and what a ride it has been. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jamie Bowl.
And I'm Maureen O'Boyle. It's wonderful to have you with us. When you think of the 1980s, maybe you think of extreme fashion or big hair.
Sure.
I know I had it. For news, the decade brought big stories in politics and major scandal with one of Charlotte's most prominent couples.
On your side.
The 80s kept our news teams busy and our area in the spotlight quite often. In the world of politics, there were firsts. Harvey B. Gantt became Charlotte's first African-American mayor in 1983, and there was the unforgettable political matchup between Jim Hunt and Jesse Helms.
Jim Hunt will concentrate on the populous Piedmont region.
In 1984, you watched and we followed the divisive political battle as it raged across North Carolina.
It was the most expensive Senate race up to its time, the most contentious, the greatest use of TV commercials.
The following year, Charlotte lost a piece of its baseball history when Crockett Park was destroyed by fire.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
In 1986, the nation watched in horror as 7 crew members on board the Challenger died as the space shuttle broke apart and exploded 73 seconds into flight.
On Christ, the solid rock I...
There's a message in today's verdict. Greed does not pay.
In 1987, all eyes were on the Carolinas. People couldn't turn away from the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker scandal. The couple, best known for their evangelical work, found themselves in the middle of a fraud investigation after a sex scandal.
For the first time, Charlotte was a city that was on the map every day.
What a story it was. Jim Baker ultimately sent to prison for fraud. The couple, you remember, later divorced. And Tammy Baker did remarry. She passed away in 2007.
So much really has changed since 1949. Some of us working at WBTV, and even you, our viewers, won't be able to see key pieces of our history in person.
Yeah, but things like, of course, the Wilder Building, where it all started. Spencer Mountain, where Jim Patterson read those first words, up and running. Or the Armory Auditorium, where so many people gathered to watch that very first day. So we rely on historian Tom Hanchett to show us.
The kids just walk out at the park present.
Stop it. WBTV today fills a whole building of screens and cameras and everything, and it's hard to believe that 70 years ago, every bit of this was a new thing. Back in the day, the Wilder Building stood on this site, an office building that held the headquarters of WBT Radio, broadcast studios where the Briarhoppers entertained the entire Carolinas. When WBTV spun off from WBT Radio, it was headquartered here at the Wilder Building on South Tryon Street initially. We're up here on the top of Spencer Mountain out in Gaston County. This is where the transmitter was for WBTV. It was a brand new thing in 1948. WBT now constructing its FM transmitter on Spencer Mountain near Gastonia, February 3rd, 1948. Radio needed that kind of broadcast reach, but so did television. It's amazing, but back in the day, WBTV was about the only thing on the air in the Southeast. State of Minnesota, House of Representatives, gentlemen, thought you would like to know that your station came in here where I live, 20 miles south of St. Cloud, Minnesota. Very good this evening. Ben's Radio Shop, Los Animas, Colorado. On April 30th, we received your program for about 2 hours from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. our time. Quality of both sound and picture was good. WBTV, as the first station in this part of the South, the airwaves weren't crowded, and if you had a tall tower like here at Spencer Mountain, you could reach forever. So here we are at the Grady Cole Center. Today, that was the Armory Auditorium back in the day, and that was where WBTV debuted this amazing new thing called television. They started in July with a test pattern. The WBTV test pattern will show you how the animated TV screen will look. WBT's multi-scope will telecast the time, the temperature, and up-to-minute news on all television sets that are now installed. But a lot of folks didn't have a television set installed. So on July 15th, you came down to the Grady Cole Center, what was then the Armory Auditorium, to watch television with your neighbors. 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower came to Charlotte, Freedom Park, and WBTV was there.
For the remote telecast of Mr. Eisenhower's speech, 3 cameras were strategically located around the lake. They were able to cover the proceedings from all vantage points.
Thousands of people thronged Freedom Park here, the lake, the band shell. But if you couldn't see President Eisenhower live, you could see him live on local TV, WBTV. But really, it's the people of WBTV that folks remember, like Cloudy Clyde McLean, the weatherman. And Betty Fieser, who was the first woman on television here with her cooking show.
Let's talk about whether you should wash your face or whether you should cream your face.
And Jim Patterson, the pioneering announcer who signed WBTV on the air July 15, 1949.
Good afternoon. This is Jim Patterson welcoming you to Channel 3 Television from WBTV, Charlotte, North Carolina.
I'm Tom Hanchett, History from the Carolina Room.
Just terrific stuff from Tom Hanchett. And we've come a long way since the test pattern was the big draw for the television station. But the one thing has been constant, the people over 70 years.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about Betty Fieser and growing up in Charlotte. I think we had every recipe ever broadcast here at our dinner table. Another thing that we have come to love here is a really good surprise.
And I just wanted to... Richard! He is a big fan of Richard Petty. How are you, sir?
How about that? Yeah, veteran reporter David Wisnett explains how this happened as we continue to celebrate 70 years on the air and in the community.
Happy 70th anniversary, WBTV News.
Our 5th decade started with art as NODA began to take shape. The city hosted its first All-Star Weekend in 1991. 5 years after it was first proposed, Ballantyne opened. In 1993, the NFL arrived, and in 1998, Hugh McCall put Charlotte on the banking map when Bank of America was born.
And today, Charlotte is the second largest banking city in America. Good evening. I'm meteorologist Lee Brock.
And I'm Christy O'Connor. You find us here bright and early on WBTV weekend mornings. And on a Saturday 25 years ago this month, heavy storms caused an ordinary 35-minute flight to Charlotte to go horribly wrong.
When our crews arrived, they saw firsthand a DC-9 jet in the middle of a Charlotte neighborhood street.
September 1991. A locked door trapped workers inside a burning Imperial Foods plant. 25 people died, 54 others hurt. Prosecutors say the owner of the plant, Emmett Rowe, ordered the door locked to stop thefts. He served 4 years of a 19-year sentence.
We are compelled to oppose Judge Thomas's confirmation.
That same year, the nation watched Anita Hill testify before Congress, and North Carolina native Julius Chambers was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
It would further threaten civil rights and constitutional guarantees.
In 1994, the murders of 10 Charlotte women were solved when Henry Louis Wallace confessed. He was known as the Charlotte Strangler.
I have O.J. in the car.
In June of 1994, the white Bronco chase with football great O.J. Simpson captivated the nation. Days before, Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ron Goldman were murdered. Simpson's trial in the killings became known as the trial of the century, ending with his acquittal. The next month, tragedy in Charlotte. Heavy rain brought down U.S. Air Flight 1016, killing 37 people.
The Charlotte Fire Department at this point, from what we've been told, until the National Transportation Safety Board arrives on the scene, is the lead agency.
The state of South Carolina intends to call this case for trial on April 24th.
The story of Susan Smith, a South Carolina mom, and her 2 sons dominated headlines between 1994 and 1995. She put her children in their car seats and sent them into a lake. She's currently serving a life sentence. She'll be eligible for parole in 2024. And in 1999 came a one-of-a-kind deal. Charlotte Motor Speedway became Lowe's Motor Speedway through a $35 million naming rights deal.
Incredible how those stories stick with us.
It is.
All these years later. Well, speaking of that speedway, that's where we find a favorite memory from WBTV veteran reporter David Wisnett.
I grew up on WBTV with Clyde McLean and Fred Kirby and Betty Feeser and Bob Inman and Jim Thacker and Doug Mays and all that crew. That's all we watched at my house. And I used to think if I could ever work at WBTV at Channel 3, that's about as good as it would get. And I've got to say how blessed I am that I've been able to do that for almost 30 of the 70 years that WBTV has been on the air. That's really hard to believe. I have a lot of great memories, but one of the best has to do with one of my all-time sports heroes. That would be the King, Richard Petty. I've loved him forever too. So we do a lot of stories at Charlotte Motor Speedway. I love going out there. One year, Jamie Bowl and I were on the air at Charlotte Motor Speedway during a weekday. We were doing a preview for the upcoming race that was going to happen that weekend. All of a sudden, I hear this commotion off behind me. Who comes around the corner but the King? Cowboy hat, sunglasses, everything.
And I just wanted to... Richard! He is a big fan of Richard Petty. How are you, sir? It's good to see you.
Well, I've been hearing him talking about the Petty crowd and all that, so we're going to let him be an honorary crew member.
It was one of the highlights of my career, and it's something I will never forget. So thank you, WBTV, for letting me be a part of the family for so long. And with so many great memories, I hope I can still make a few more.
All right, still ahead, the storm that gave neighbors from Charlotte south to Lancaster County a rude awakening 30 years ago.
Plus, the snowstorm that stranded people in an uptown office building. Those stories and more next as we celebrate being on your side for 70 years.
Happy 70th birthday, WBTV.
In our 6th decade, the Carolina Panthers went to their first Super Bowl. Public transportation made a huge leap when the light rail opened in 2007. The recession proved nearly detrimental for Wachovia until Wells Fargo stepped in 2008. And in 2009, Charlotte got its first taste of the craft brewery industry thanks to Old Mecklenburg Brewery.
The 2000s were certainly busy. Lots of news and lots of weather. Welcome and thanks for continuing to join us here. I'm Molly Grantham.
And I'm meteorologist Eric Thomas. Molly, this particular decade holds stories that were not only significant for Charlotte, but they affected the entire nation as well.
November 1999, Sharika Adams called for help after someone shot her on Ray Road. She implicated her then-boyfriend, Carolina Panthers football player Ray Caruth. He was later convicted of conspiracy in the case and sentenced to 20 years in prison. In March of 2000, we became the news while covering it. Sky 3 was in the air, our pilot and a photographer on board, when things went horribly wrong.
You can see the rotors are bent. The tail rotor is off in the field as well, and that is the part that initially went bad. It stopped working.
Thankfully, our team walked away from it that day, able to tell their story.
Started out slow, and then I couldn't stop it. It started turning to the right, and so I tried to stop it with the tail rotor pedals, and they wouldn't stop it.
That same year, more than 100 people were hurt when a walkway onto the highway from Lowe's Motor Speedway collapsed. Then, on February 18, 2001, NASCAR changed forever. The legend, the Intimidator, killed in the running of the Daytona 500. Months later, we, the United States, were under attack.
The situation locally in Charlotte is one of calm at this moment. It is a terrible scene for both New York and Washington, D.C.
A plane had just crashed into the World Trade Center.
We heard the building coming down, and that's what we were running from. Literally, people ran out of their shoes trying to get out of the way of this thing.
Thousands were killed. America was in mourning. America was headed to war. April 1st, 2007. A day forever etched in Charlotte's memory.
Just hearing the dispatcher just say those words over the air, that we have 2 officers shot in North Tryon Division, just makes your heart skip a beat.
Those officers were 34-year-old Sean Clark and 35-year-old Jeff Shelton, killed in the line of duty. In the days that followed, the entire city, even strangers, came together to honor and remember both of them.
People standing out on both sides of the road, lined up to pay the respects. They didn't know them, but they were there.
And in 2009, a miracle. A bird strike forced Captain Sully Sullenberger to land a plane bound for Charlotte from New York on the Hudson River. Not a single life was lost.
Wow, seeing that video takes you right back. So many of those images.
Yeah, it's like a slingshot, Molly. I mean, as you just said, every one of those stories still feels like it was just yesterday for me.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really does. It was crazy to see. When it comes to weather in our area, the Carolinas have seen it all.
Oh, absolutely, Molly. And right now, I'm going to toss it to my colleague of 26 years, meteorologist Al Conklin. He has a whole lot more.
WBTV has a long history of covering the biggest weather events to impact our region, from the mountains to the Piedmont here in Charlotte and all the way to the coast. Of course, first it was cloudy Clyde McLean. Then Mike McKay took up the mantle of covering weather. And Eric Thomas and I were the first two meteorologists hired by WBTV. And of course, since then, we've been covering a lot of different weather events. When talking about the biggies, usually you got to start with Hurricane Hugo. It first hit 30 years ago in September as a Category 4 storm down in Charleston. In fact, Steve Crump was there that night covering it live for us. And everybody went to bed in Charlotte thinking, well, poor Charleston, they've had such a bad time of it. Well, little do they know that this thing came right up into the Charlotte area with 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And of course, it was a terrible situation. It wasn't so much the rain, it was the wind that was the biggest impact here. Trees and trees and trees were down with 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And folks were cutting up trees, it seemed like, for months. And of course, in many neighborhoods, the power was out for 2 or 3 weeks. So it really was a big storm for a lot of people. Unfortunately, more than 50 people lost their lives. When we think about snow, I usually think about the big one that I covered here, and that was in 2004, February 2004, Charlotte with over 13 inches of snow, still the third largest snow total ever here in the city's history. And we had upwards of 2 feet of snow in York County. And the thing that caught that one was that, well, a lot of folks in Center City went to work and got caught in the tall towers during the snow, during the height of the storm, couldn't get home. Kids were trapped at school, couldn't get home. A very young reporter by the name of Molly Grantham covered that one in York County in particular. So when we talk about big storms around here, we talk about the floods, we talk about the thunderstorms, of course, the tornadoes, the hurricanes. We have covered it all here. Eric Thomas and I combined over 60 years experience at WBTV, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot more big storms, whether they're hurricanes, ice storms, or snowstorms, that we'll be covering for many years to come.
Well, Al did a great job of rattling off all the weather elements that we get here, Molly, and just to put an exclamation point on that point, we actually get more weather here in the Carolinas than any other point on the planet Earth. There is not one.
That's surprising.
Yeah, there is. There is not one kind of weather that you can think of that we don't get here in North Carolina.
And if you say it, then it's true. How long have you been here, Eric?
31 years, Molly.
31 years. As we look back at the past 70 years of things with WBTV, we're also going to take a look ahead at what's in the future. That's coming up next.
In the past 10 years, Charlotte became home to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The city hosted the Democratic National Convention in 2012. The Charlotte Knights moved uptown to BB&T Ballpark in 2014, and we watched the first PGA Championship to be played at Quail Hollow Club in 2017. Just this year, Charlotte's banking footprint grew larger as SunTrust and BB&T announced a merger to headquarter Truist right here in the Queen City. So now we head into WBTV's 8th decade. We closed out our 7th at noon today. It's a decade that we nor the community will ever forget.
According to law, so help you God.
I do.
Congratulations and all good wishes.
Thank you very much.
In 2013, former Charlotte Mayor Pat McCrory was sworn in as governor of North Carolina. Months later, Patrick Cannon was elected Charlotte's 56th mayor, but his time in office was short-lived. He pleaded guilty to federal corruption charges in 2014 and was sent to prison. In 2015, all eyes were on the Randall Carrick trial, a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer charged in the 2013 shooting death of Jonathan Farrell. The trial ended in a hung jury. Prosecutors later announced they would not retry the case. In 2016, HB 2, or the bathroom bill as it was better known, put Charlotte in the national spotlight again. Months of controversy surrounded the legislation before it was eventually repealed. September 2016 is a time Charlotte will always remember. Unrest filled the streets. Violence erupted over the Keith Lamont Scott shooting. We were there as protesters clashed with police. In 2018, officers with the Rock Hill Police Department and York County Sheriff's Office were hurt in a shootout while responding to a domestic violence call. 3 of the men hurt survived. 1 did not. He was Detective Mike Doty. A South Carolina highway now bears his name. In October 2018, we were there when former Carolina Panther player Ray Carruth walked out of a North Carolina prison a free man. The national media would return to North Carolina weeks later for the fallout surrounding the race for House District 9 between Mark Harris and Dan McCready. It ended with the State Board of Elections calling for a new election. Mark Harris is not running. March of 2019 brought more controversy after a deadly officer-involved shooting outside a Burger King on Beatties Ford Road. A month later, in April, gunfire erupted on the campus of UNC Charlotte. 4 students were hurt, 2 students killed. One of them hailed a hero for stopping the gunman before any more lives were taken. And in May, we lost another hero. Mooresville police officer Jordan Sheldon was shot and killed during a traffic stop. The support for the department and Sheldon family was swift. The community showed up in numbers, and through vigils, memorials, and a miles-long procession, neighbors said goodbye. So as you saw, some of the most trying times in the last 7 decades came during the past 10 years. We've learned many lessons. We have grieved together, supported each other, and we've grown together. And with that, we move forward. A new chapter awaits, and you may ask, what's next? Well, for us here at WBTV, we're excited to announce a new show and a change for one of our most beloved. QC at 3 is going to hit the air this September. It's a weekday afternoon show being produced right here at WBTV that's meant to empower, engage, entertain, and educate. And as part of that, we're going to tie in QC at 3 with Morning Break with a relaunch of the show, and it's now going to be known as QC Morning. But don't worry, it's going to still be packed with all the fun you are used to on that show. And finally, we're changing things up digitally. Queen City Weekend will become QC Life. It's your source to learn more about things to see and things to do right here in Charlotte. Well, the television industry constantly changing, and we here at WBTV are committed to adapting to those changes while staying true to our core values. We leave it tonight with a message that dates back to our beginning. Just as Jim Patterson's words rang true on our 10th anniversary, they still do today. Good night. Thank you for watching. Thank you for 70 years and counting.
We now dedicate ourselves to another dynamic decade, the one just beginning tonight. Now, we fully realize that in show business, you're only as good as your last performance. Thus, we know that in the future, we must continue to warrant your support by presenting a well-balanced, well-produced schedule of entertainment and information. We summarize our feelings by thanking you for your praises and thanking you for your criticisms in the past, trusting that our rededication to our responsibility will continue to warrant them in the future.
Happy 70th birthday to WBTV.